Emma Parker had lived in Maplewood her entire life. It was the kind of town where people still left their doors unlocked, where the church bell rang every Sunday morning, and where the seasons painted Main Street in colors so vivid it looked like something out of a postcard. It wasn't a place where surprises happened very often, and everyone seemed to know everything about everyone else. Or at least, that's what Emma had always thought. But like most people, she had a habit of walking past stories without seeing them. Every morning, Emma's routine was the same. She'd leave her little apartment on Elm Street, cut through the park, and head down Main to the tiny cafe on the corner before work. And every morning, without fail, she passed by Miller's Auto Service, a modest garage with a weathered tin roof and an old sign that had long since faded from bright red to a muted, dusty pink. Out front, there was always an elderly man in blue overalls, his silver hair peeking out from under a cap that looked like it had survived 100 winters. He was usually bent over some rusted pickup or a stubborn sedan, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag that had probably once been white. He'd look up as she passed, nodding with a gentle tip of his cap. Emma would offer a quick, polite smile before hurrying along, her thoughts already lost in the day ahead. To her, he was just one of those familiar faces you see every day but never really think about. The kind of person you imagine has lived the same simple life forever, existing quietly in the corners of a town's collective memory. She didn't even know his name. And honestly, she never expected to. But life has a funny way of putting the right people in your path at exactly the right moment, whether you realize it or not. It happened one cool April morning. The sky was a stubborn shade of gray, hinting at the first real rain of the season. Emma was already running late for an important meeting at the office, one that could finally land her the promotion she'd been chasing for months. Her presentation was loaded onto a flash drive. Her nerves were a mess, and her ancient sedan was doing its usual trick of groaning every time she turned the key. But that morning, the old car didn't just groan. It sputtered, coughed, and died with a shuddering wheeze right as she passed Miller's Auto Service. Of all the places to break down, Emma hit the steering wheel in frustration and cursed under her breath. She was about to call a tow truck when a voice called out, "Need a hand, miss?" She looked up to see the old mechanic walking toward her, wiping his hands on that same oil-streaked rag. There was something in his voice, warm, kind, steady, that made her pause. Desperation overruled her usual instinct to decline help from strangers. "Yeah," she sighed. "It won't start. And I've got somewhere I really need to be." Without saying another word, the man motioned for her to pop the hood. He leaned in, his hands moving with the kind of confidence that comes from years of knowing how things work, even when they don't want to. "You're Emma Parker, right?" She blinked. How do you know?" He gave her a crooked grin. "Small town. Folks talk." It wasn't meant to be unsettling, and it wasn't. In Maplewood, it was just the way of things. Within 15 minutes, he had her car rumbling to life again. He dusted off his hands, closed the hood, and tipped his cap once more. "How much do I owe you?" Emma asked, reaching for her wallet. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just being neighborly." And with that, he went back to work, as though he hadn't just rescued her from a near disaster. Emma drove away with a mixture of relief and guilt. Guilt for not even knowing his name. For walking past him all these years like he was just part of the scenery. The next morning, she did something she'd never done before. She stopped at the cafe and bought an extra cup of coffee. Black, 2 sugars, she guessed, somehow feeling like it was the right choice, and walked it over to Miller's Auto Service. The old man looked up from under the hood of a dusty pickup and raised an eyebrow. "That for me?" Emma smiled. "Hey, thank you. For yesterday." He chuckled and took the cup, his hands rough but careful as he held it. And that was how it started. A simple cup of coffee. Day after day, Emma would bring him one. And in return, they'd talk. Not much at first. Just about the weather, the town, the latest high school football scores. But over time, the conversations deepened. She learned his name was Henry Miller. That he'd lived in Maplewood his entire life. That he'd married a girl named Mary when he was 22. And that she'd passed away nearly a decade ago. That he had a son named Sam, a nurse at the local hospital. That he liked fishing but hadn't been in years. That he thought new cars were all computers and no soul. Emma found herself looking forward to those talks more than she ever expected. There was something steadying about Henry. Like an anchor you didn't realize you needed until life started tugging you off course. Then came the storm. It was one of those relentless summer downpours that turned the streets into rivers and the sky into a bruised shade of purple. Emma was driving home from the grocery store when she saw a figure hunched over on the side of the road. A boy, maybe 15 or 16, trying in vain to fix a twisted bicycle wheel. He was drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead. Emma pulled over. "You okay?" she called. The boy looked up, startled. I can't fix it. My phone's dead." "Where's home?" "By the shop." "What shop?" He glanced up the road. "Miller's. My dad's probably there." Emma's stomach flipped. "You're Henry's son?" The boy smiled through the rain. "You know him?" "Yeah," she said softly. "Hop in." They drove in silence for a few minutes, the boy dripping onto the seat, Emma's heart pounding for reasons she didn't fully understand. When they reached the garage, Henry was standing under the awning, eyes scanning the storm. Relief washed over his face when he saw them. "Sam, thank God." The boy jumped out of the car and into his father's arms. Emma stepped out too, pulling her jacket tighter around her. As she turned to leave, Sam spoke again. "You're the lady who was born at St. Mary's, right?" Emma blinked. "Yeah. How do you know?" Sam grinned. "Dad built that hospital." She laughed, confused. "What do you mean? Like, fixed a generator or something?" "No," Sam said, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "He built it. As in, he gave them the land, ran every fundraiser, and poured his savings into it. Everybody in town knows that." Emma stared at Henry, who was suddenly very interested in the rain-soaked gravel beneath his feet. "You built St. Mary's," she whispered. Henry shrugged. "Didn't do it alone. Took a lot of good people. I just got it started." A lump formed in Emma's throat. She remembered her mother's stories about that little hospital. How Emma had been born 7 weeks early, fighting for every breath. How the nearest proper hospital was once 2 towns over, and how St. Mary's had given her a fighting chance. And all this time, the man she'd thought was just a mechanic had been the reason she was even here. She didn't know what to say. Over the weeks that followed, she learned more. About how Henry had lost his own baby daughter years before St. Mary's was built. How the roads were too rough, the hospital too far. How grief had driven him to make sure no one else in Maplewood would suffer the same loss. He'd sold a piece of land his grandfather left him. Pushed bake sales, town fairs, church collections. Hammered boards with his own hands. Never wanted his name on the building. Never asked for credit. He just did it. For the town. For the children. For the future. For people like Emma. When a job offer from a firm in Chicago came through, the promotion she'd once thought she wanted more than anything, Emma turned it down. She stayed in Maplewood. Organized a fundraiser to renovate the pediatric wing at St. Mary's. Campaigned to rename it the Miller Family Children's Center. Henry protested, of course. Said it wasn't necessary. But the town agreed. Some debts are owed too deep for silence. At the dedication ceremony, Emma stood at the podium, her voice thick with emotion. "I used to think heroes wore capes," she said. "That they made headlines or lived on TV screens. But sometimes they wear blue overalls. They fixed your car without asking for a dime. They remember your name when you don't remember theirs. They quietly build the world you're lucky enough to be born into." Henry's eyes glistened. And somewhere, between wildflowers and wrenches, a town finally remembered the man who'd held them together. Because kindness leaves echoes. And sometimes it takes a lifetime or a rain-soaked boy with a broken bike to hear them.